We're going to begin and let our friends on I-5 suffer in traffic. Thank you for coming on time. Welcome to the University of Portland, and thank you for coming. I'm Peter Hamilton, the coordinator of the University of Portland's Educational Leadership Network. Our commitment is to combine national and regional expertise with local practitioners and our own School of Education faculty to provide support and networking for the educational leadership community. Quite simply, we want the University of Portland to be a resource for you and your colleagues. We have a planning board that consists of school and district leaders and the UP faculty. This year's focus is on teacher evaluation and Senate Bill 290, and we're looking at Common Core and Smarter Balance for next year's ELN Symposium. Now, I'd like to introduce the School of Education Dean, John Watzke, who will introduce tonight's special guest. John.
Well, welcome. I welcome you certainly as Dean of the School of Education, but also as a parent with 3 children in local schools. I welcome you as a colleague as well in practice and in development as well. Tonight is in some ways unlike any other night. We certainly welcome teachers and school leaders in the evenings who enroll in credential courses, programs as well, our educational doctorate program as well. And I wouldn't be a dean if I didn't mention that we have a lot of program brochures out in the front entryway. Please feel free to pick those up along the way. However, this evening we welcome you as a greater professional network. We welcome James Popham. James is a distinguished professor emeritus at the University of California, Los Angeles, a nationally recognized specialist in education, and I'm sure many of you know his over 20 books, over 300 articles and texts as well. Books such as Classroom Assessment, What Teachers Need to Know. It's now in its 7th edition. We have a Corwin Press actually rep right here. Assessment for Educational Leaders. I don't know why I expected applause after each of these. Transformative Assessment, Modern Educational Measurement, Where's Waldo, Book 1 and 2. There we go. And his newest text, and of course the topic of tonight's discussion, Evaluating America's Teachers, Mission Possible. Now all these books are available out in the lobby, and they'll be available during the networking session as well. We have a Barnes & Noble table set up for you as well. Dr. Popham grew up in Portland, starting school at Sunnyside Elementary and graduating from Portland Public Schools. He attended the University of Portland, where he graduated cum laude with a bachelor's in philosophy and received a master's degree in education the following year. He was certainly known as a leader on campus during his time at UP, and we've learned even most recently this summer that this was a formative time in which he learned to love academic deans, correct? There we go. But truth be told, this habit of leadership is evidenced throughout his career. Dr. Popham began his career in education as a teacher in a small Eastern Oregon high school where he taught English, social studies, and also a yearbook advisor. He served as a sponsor of the class, tennis coach as well. After receiving his doctorate from Indiana University, Dr. Popham accepted an assistant professorship at Kansas State College in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and then returned to the West Coast by accepting a position at San Francisco State College, where he taught briefly until he was appointed as an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education at UCLA. This is consistently one of the top graduate schools of education in the nation. There he earned associate, full, and emeritus professorships and was awarded in 1968 with the Distinguished Teaching Award. And his career is, regaled with many such awards. He's served in many leadership positions, both regionally and nationally. These include, for example, president of the American Educational Research Association and founder of its, and editor of its quarterly journal, Educational Evaluation and Policy. Above all, Dr. Popham's work is described as engaging, taking on theory and practice, but also the ethical and political dilemmas that face educators, those other realities. I proudly present to you a great scholar, a leader, a teacher, an author, and most importantly, a great alumnus dedicated to our profession. Welcome, Dr. Popham.
Thank you, Dean. I am pleased to be back on campus. It's been obvious from his introduction that I'm an Oregon guy. He did not mention, while I was at Sunnyside Grade School, they called it grade school back then. When I was at Sunnyside Grade School, I was appointed official prince of the Rose Festival from my elementary school. This is not listed on my Vita, but as far as I know, John, the title has never been revoked. So, in a sense, I am still. Well, actually, I'm coming out. I'm a latent royal, if you must know. Moreover, I have looked at a lot of organizational charts, and there is not a single one where dean is above prince. So get straight about your role here. The truth is, prophets are without honor in their own land. And I did grow up and go to school here, 5 terrific years at the university. But I have written documentation that I lived outside Oregon for 50 years. And so my remarks tonight, I'd like you to regard as that of a prophet on probation. Because I've returned now, I live in Wilsonville, and it's fun to be out here once more. And I just got to tell you, walking on campus today, it is so beautiful in contrast to the fairly primitive. We had to clear trees when we went to campus. It was that bad. I did teach in Hepner, and one of the classes I did teach was speech. And in that class, I remember telling my students for any kind of an important address, and I think this one is tonight, the topic that we're dealing with, one of the things you have to do is establish the significance of the topic. And we're talking about teacher evaluation, and I assure you, I can't think of many topics now that could be more influential on what happens in our country's schools. What's happening across the land has the potential to do good. I really think it does. But I believe the potential to do harm is even greater. And that's why it's so crucial to understand this. A second thing I used to tell my students was establish your credentials, establish the credibility of the presenter. And I've got to tell you, when I left Oregon, within a month after leaving, I was in Bloomington, Indiana, working on teacher evaluation. Within the first couple of weeks, as a grad student there pursuing a doctorate, I was assigned a topic of analyzing a 54-year review of teacher evaluation studies in this country from 1900 to 1954. I mean, that was the start of my career, really, and I had to stick with it. Did you notice a subtle distinction in the microphone? I am breathing the same way. Nothing seems different. Anyhow, when I started that work, and just looking back, in my career, I've probably spent about 15 years off and on focusing specifically on teacher evaluation. I did a 9-year project where we created performance tests of teaching effectiveness, where we'd literally provide precise objectives to teachers, background information they would have to teach students, and then we would try to gauge the effectiveness of the instruction based on the student's performance on tests that the teacher had not previously seen for 9 whole years. And I worked with observation schedules and ratings and all of it. So I've really been around the barn a bit, and I guess I want to say that because I'll be offering some suggestions regarding how I think you have to tackle teacher evaluation. When some initiatives came out of the federal government that have led our country and Oregon and Washington too, to establish more rigorous, more demanding teacher evaluation programs, when they came out, I found myself wondering, is this another thing? Do I need to say anything about this new development? Because I spent so many years of my life messing with it. And I decided that I would. And the reason I did is because teacher evaluation, and it may come as a surprise to many of you, has not been a studied phenomenon in our country. people have not dealt with teacher evaluation in any kind of rigorous research manner. You won't find many books about it. You won't find many research articles dealing with it. It just hasn't been studied. And I'll be suggesting in a moment, if we've done teacher evaluation at all, it's been kind of, focused on the formative, improved kind of teacher evaluation. And now you have this new thing coming out. So I decided to try to put together my thinking. And what I'll try to do in a very short period of time tonight is to offer you a glimpse of what's coming. And that's the last thing I want to say about speeches. Let the audience know what's up. And what's up in this instance is that I'm going to try to have some of you pick up a few insights regarding important issues in teacher evaluation. Many of you are already familiar with them. Some of you may not be. We'll have opportunities for you to turn and talk to people nearby. If you're sitting, as that one gentleman is, all by himself, he will have to engage in psychomotor behavior to move to someone else. And so we'll have some things like that. And I'll have some myth-busting opportunities, because there's some myths about teacher evaluation that I think worth kicking around. And then I think the way it's set up at the end of the day is we're going to have some time for questions and answers. And I must say, just in passing, Peter, you're in charge of this Educational Leadership Network. I'm very impressed with what's going on at this place with respect to your reaching out to the field. There's terrific stuff. You know, I taught almost 30 years at UCLA, and the hardest thing in the world to get my colleagues to do is care about what was happening in schools. They would not do it. Let us publish, let us publish, let us publish, let us be prestigious, but not let us fuss with the schools. And this is what I see you guys doing, John, and it's just terrific stuff. Okay, now, John has given me this device, which was apparently purchased at a garage sale. And he alleges it will work. We will now see. I'm pointing it toward that machine that has this little, This is the cheapest frigging, this is the notion of teacher evaluation as I see it in our country. And that's why the change is so significant. We focus on improvement-oriented teaching, evaluation. We rarely dismiss teachers because of incompetence. Frankly, most of the teacher evaluation systems were devised as a consequence of agreements between unions and school boards in a way that protected teachers more than worried about children. And I say that. I was a member of OEA when I was a teacher, Oregon Education Association, and I know that professional associations have a natural bent to protecting members. That's pretty obvious, but that's been pretty worrisome. Now I press this down. Stupid thing. Okay. These are the puppies that changed the party. In 2009, the federal government installed the Race to the Top program. Big bucks, major dollars available to states that would apply for a grant. But one of the provisos for that grant was that a state would have to make its teacher evaluation program more demanding, more rigorous. And it laid out some requirements, if not requirements, at least recommendations. And many states, cash-strapped as they were, applied for that kind of money. And immediately you saw some states, back as far as 2009, getting their legislatures to install teacher evaluation requirements that were consonant with what the feds wanted. So these are not laws, but they're initiatives, if you will, and they carry with them some attractive rewards, or in some cases, penalty avoidance. And the next one was the ESEA flexibility program, which came along 2 years later, but included essentially the same requirements or recommendations regarding teacher evaluation. And that's why all this stuff is going on, because state officials, state chiefs, commissioners, and so on, saw this as a way to avoid having all of their schools identified as having failed to master adequate yearly progress. I mean, what this demonstrates quite clearly is Arne Duncan's administration knew how to cleverly employ the resources at their disposal, and they did it. You've had a massive shift in this country and in teacher evaluation, and it's very impressive, and it was done without law. It was done because of incentives. Okay, here are the themes that are in both of those initiatives, and they are 6, and I've summarized them here. First, there's a focus on instructional improvement. You know, that's kind of the rhetoric you almost have to use, and that's certainly present. 3 performance levels are needed, no big deal about that. The most significant of the 6 is the third one, that multiple evidence sources must be used, with student growth being a significant factor. Now, that's a different game, folks, a very different game, because what it says is, we're not just going to trust principals to look in on teachers and say they're nifty-poo. Rather, we are going to oblige those who evaluate teachers to produce evidence of kid learning, and that's objective, and that can't be fussed with. That's big stuff. The next one, regularly performed, no problem there. Clear, timely, useful feedback, again, okay. And contributory to personnel decisions. Now, let me, this all of a sudden, it makes it an initiative that can have an impact on someone's career. This can cost you your job. This can certainly cost you a promotion and so on. And in a sense, if you look at the 5th one, it's timely and useful feedback, the implication there is timely and useful feedback so that feedback can be used to make you better, right? And so in a sense, you kind of think, well, this has a kind of a formative improvement orientation, not when that 6th one comes up, because that's the big bubby. This machine, as I looked at those 6 requirements, and remember, this is a guy sitting out in Wilsonville thinking about whether he wants to write a book or even get into this area again. I thought there were 4 potential ways to go wrong. Notice at the top of that, in yellow, it says a well-conceived federal vision. I don't think that vision is terrible at all. I think what the feds wanted to do, using multiple sources of evidence, including student learning as a prominent feature, good golly, that's great stuff. Nothing wrong with that. Now, how can it muck up? How could we have good teachers judged inadequate and bad teachers judged acceptable? You see, because that is the peril. I talked earlier about the significance of this law. Think about a teacher who is doing really well by kids. Kids are learning, and that evaluation system judges this teacher to be inadequate. The teacher will obviously abandon some of the techniques that are working very well for kids. And as a consequence of that abandonment, kids are less well taught. Similarly, an inadequate teacher who should be identified for improvement support or even bounced out of the profession, that teacher will be thought acceptable if the teacher evaluation system sucks, and that's the peril. We got to figure out a way to make it as accurate as we possibly can. So these are the 4 reasons that I concluded were the ones that could make a difference. And I want you to think about those 4 for a second. One is using inappropriate evidence of a teacher's quality. If teachers are judged on the basis of, for example, students' performance on tests for which there is no evidence that they are able to distinguish between students who have been taught by effective versus ineffective teachers, if the wrong test evidence is used, then quite clearly inaccurate decisions are apt to be made. And here is the scary part. In many instances around the country, states have committed 50%. 50% of the teacher's evaluation must be based on evidence of student growth. A report came out this week. I just got it Monday, indicating 23 states are now requiring 50% of a teacher's evaluation. I used to be a teacher in Heppner, Oregon. I would have been judged 50% on the basis of how well my kids performed on some kind of measure. And the measure may well be the test used in Oregon, the state test. There is not in the language of the original documents, but in a subsequent guidance to states, there is the requirement that if you have a state test that is being used for No Child Left Behind, then you have to use that in the mix. But the focus is on student growth here, and quite clearly, if you use the wrong tests to gather the evidence, you'll make a serious mistake, and that's what worried me personally. That was my big worry. The second is improperly weighting appropriate evidence of a teacher's quality. You got appropriate evidence, but you weight it too heavily, or you weight it too little. I mean, we have a long history in our field of principals being too positive regarding teachers, judging them too lenient. And if you made an evaluation of a teacher heavily dependent on the principal's evaluation where the principal only gave positive evaluations, that too would be bad. Failure to adjust evidence weights for a given teacher's instructional setting. This doesn't happen very often, but there are instances in which you may find that a teacher is dealing with, for example, students coming from the previous grade where because of some illness and a totally inadequate substitute, these kids didn't learn squat. And they come to you, and the teacher has the responsibility of dealing with them. In situations like that, there should be some allowance for that. But many of the systems we see evolving in state departments of education around the country make no possibility of adjusting for unique situations. And I don't think it's going to be happening all that often, but sometimes. And finally, confounding the functions of formative and summative teacher evaluation. It may seem like not a very important worry to you, but it worries the devil out of me. Remember, the whole zeitgeist of what we've done in teacher evaluation over the years is to improve teachers. Who can fault improving teachers, But when you set out to improve teachers and at the same time use the evidence you garnered in the improvement vehicle to actually make a decision regarding the teacher's termination, let me tell you, teachers don't fess up. I mean, career threats compromise candor, and people don't let you know what's going on. And as a consequence, both of those things might go wrong. In other words, here are the 4 mistakes that prompted me to write a book. And you can decide which, if any of those, is more important to you. I was just in last week in Atlanta talking to a conference of people who were dominantly concerned about evaluation. And I asked them to individually think what they thought were the most significant ones. The one that they thought was the most significant was the 4th. My personal concern is the 5th. Okay. I move this. Here we are. Okay. Please turn to 1 or 2 persons nested, choosing individuals who seem to be reasonably bright. No. You don't have to. You don't have to leave John just because of that. I mean, okay. Then indicate to each other what teacher evaluative roles should be played by student scores on the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, Oaks, because currently no evidence exists indicating that these tests are instructionally sensitive. So in a sense, what I want you to think about is how heavily do you believe that Oaks results should be employed in the evaluation of a teacher if, in fact, there is no evidence of its instructional sensitivity? Turn and talk to someone else. Okay, folks, could I get your attention? Could I get your attention? Thank you for dealing with that issue. It'll come back in a subsequent Turn and Talk episode. It's a sincere worry for me. Now, we're going to talk about teacher evaluation tonight, and I wish we had more time. I'm going to be careful of the time because there's supposed to be questions, and I'll move along. But, I was around in '65 when ESEA was passed. ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act of '65. And it said in order to get next year's money, you had to evaluate this year's program. Educators in America didn't know what they were talking about. We had no idea what evaluation was. That's where you got things like Scriven in '67 writing about formative and summative evaluation. At the time, we used Ralph Tyler's notions of goals and their accomplishment. We didn't know how to do it. And I'm submitting to you that in general, we don't know very much about how to evaluate teachers. We really don't. And some of the notions apply. You're not just assessing, you're trying to establish the worth of a person, process, or performance. And the evaluative criteria are the ones you use to decide worth. So you got worth, that's a charge. How good is this teacher? And you have to have some factors you use to decide whether that teacher is any good. And then evidence, data or documentation that in a sense operationalizes an evaluative criterion. In a moment we'll be talking about some of the evaluative criteria that the state of Oregon, because of SBIL 290, is using. And then you have to look at all the potential evaluative criteria and evidence that you can apply. And these are the things that we need to use. Now, defensible teacher evaluation sine qua non. I took 3 years of Latin here under Father Geis, and largely in retribution, I try to use Latin once a month, and no more. You don't want to overdo anything. But my conclusion was this. If by definition, the evaluation game that you're employing requires you to use multiple sources of evidence, and those teachers who are being evaluated function in particular settings, and the evidence quality may differ not only in general, but as it applies to a particular teacher, you have to use human judgment. You cannot dodge it. And any evaluation system that does not rely on human judgment is an evaluation system, I argue in this instance, in teacher evaluation, that's destined to fail. And so that was, oh, come on. Come on. Come on, guys. I'm just trying my very best to make this thing work. As the dean says, there are brochures and things outside. I would be willing to pass a damn basket if we could get more money for our basket. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay. Is this where we are? Thank you. All right, fine. There is no such thing as an effective teacher. And thank you, John. I tried him for this, but I'm sure it's good for some kind of penalty. A lot of people think there is an effective teacher, and the research is unequivocal on that. There is no such thing as one way to teach something and make sure it'll work. My classic example of that down at UCLA, when I went down there to teach prospective teachers. I was largely because of my experience here at the University of Portland, learning about teacher education. I wanted to go in that area, and so I really worked hard at making my classes as effective as I could. I taught large classes, something like almost 1,000 teachers a year, elementary and secondary teachers. I was teaching about instructional methodology per se. And after I taught for several years, it was a heavy load, so I asked a new professor, a new assistant professor, Eva Baker, who's gone on to have a very nice reputation, if she would teach in the second semester. I teach the first semester, she'd teach the second semester. And we agreed early on to use the same final examinations. Fundamentally, a little change, but essentially the same final exams. Well, Eva taught it very differently than I could. Peter would ask a question, and instead of answering it, she would find a way to reflect it back. She'd somehow bounce it back, and he would have to come to the answer. I mean, she just would not answer. Now, if Peter asked me a question, having access to wisdom, I would share it with him. I said, you know, why shield the kid from truth? And so fundamentally, it was a distinction between a democratic approach and a fascist approach. And yet, in the final analysis, there was no difference in our exams. The kids performed the same way on both. I could not have taught her way, nor could she have taught my way. So there is no such thing as an effective teacher, and that's clearly a myth. And here is the strategy I concluded would work. A moment ago I said what you're really trying to do is you're trying to use human judgment. And if you are employing different kinds of evidence, by definition, you really have to use this kind of a model or something akin to it. And so in the book that was just mentioned, that's the one that I try to trot out. Here's another turn and task. The current teacher evaluation system required by the Oregon Department of Ed is based on professional practice, professional responsibilities, and student learning and growth. Now, using 3 hunks of 100%, what weight would you give to each of these 3 categories, and discuss your weights with a neighbor? And let me explain what these things are. So you got these 3 evaluative criteria. That's how ODE is split up the game. 3 evaluative criteria. One is professional practice. That's the kind of stuff that you would, you get evidence of this from watching a teacher teach, classroom observations, artifacts the teacher uses, things of that sort. The second would be professional responsibilities, and this would be a teacher's self-report, a teacher's aspiration for professional development, a teacher's contribution to what goes on in the school. And so, in other words, is this a good member of the profession? And finally, student learning and growth. And student learning and growth can come from the state tests. Absent those tests, because many teachers don't have them, you could use local tests, a classroom assessment, other kinds of tests, and so on. Now, your challenge, either staying with the same person, or if you didn't like that person the last time, move to a different seat, to think of those 3, professional practice, professional responsibilities, and student learning, and if you had 100% to spend, how would you weight them? What would the 3 hunks be? Take a few moments, please. Okay, folks, let me get you back again. Let's reconvene. This particular challenge is one that will face any Oregon, or indeed Washington school district, that attempts to literally think carefully about how you want to weight the different sources of evidence. Or in this case, weight the different evaluative criteria, because those are 3 separate criteria. Now, what I decided to do, let's see, I'm putting it over here. Okay. Here, let me speak to you, fellow. Aha! It just wants to be loved. Okay. Here are the 5 steps to weighted evidence judgment. And we'll just spin through them very quickly. First, you select the evaluative criterion or criteria that you want to use. You choose the evidence sources for each evaluative criteria. It could be more than one, could be one. You weight each evidence source chosen. You decide, is this a very meaningful contributor to evaluating a teacher? Then you decide if any weights need adjustment when applied to a particular teacher. That might happen, not all that often, but it might happen. And finally, you coalesce the weighted evidence sources into an overall judgment. Now, Corwin, the outfit that I write the book for, is actually going to start offering 2-day teacher evaluation academies. And Ray Smith, wave your hand, Ray. Ray Smith and his wife and about 10 other experienced administrators are going to facilitate these things. And what we're really trying to do is show how that model works. We are, Corwin is, and I'm delighted to help him, really concerned about the extent to which local districts will stumble when they're trying to implement their teacher evaluation procedures, and that's one of the ways we think you can move forward with it. Oh, come on, you. That's what the thing looks like. By the way, I did that by myself, and that's why it's so primitive. Okay, here's another myth-busting moment. We can accurately evaluate a teacher by watching the teacher teach. Everyone thinks that. Everyone thinks that. Because you guys in the audience, you remember the good teachers. You remember the bad teachers. And it is assumed that we can really spot teachers by watching them. What you essentially do is you see whether they are employing certain practices which probabilistically have produced better student growth. And that's great. But that's probabilistically. And you do not know for sure whether a teacher who is using a particular set of really research corroborated principles does in fact do a good job with kids. And so that's the worry. And you can spot the extremes, the really great teachers or the really crummy teachers. But the middle, maybe the middle 60% or more, that's really tough to spot. Now, if you're thinking about spotting the exceptional teachers, the outstanding teachers, by definition standing out, you really can do that very well. I was trying to think of an example, and the best one I came up with is one that happened to me many years ago. We used to trace Peace Corps volunteers at UCLA to go to Central America and to Africa, Ethiopia and Nigeria, to teach. And I was working on the instructional methodology part of it. And so these were wonderful kids to work with. I mean, they were mostly young people at that time, and they were terribly bright and terribly motivated. And so when about 10 months after I trained a whole bunch of them to go to Ethiopia, I got a call to follow them up for 3 weeks in Ethiopia, go around the empire, and watch them. I jumped at the opportunity. And I was there for 3 weeks watching these guys teach. And I was just about finished. In eastern Ethiopia, there's a town called Harar. And I'd finished all my visits to the Peace Corps volunteers. But I'd never seen an Ethiopian teacher teach. And so I asked the headmaster, I said, is it possible for me to watch an Ethiopian teacher in practice? And he said, absolutely. So we go out to an outbuilding, and there is a female teacher teaching a class of, I would guess, 4th graders, perhaps 5th graders, I'm not sure. And it was kind of an outbuilding. And she was teaching in Amharic. Amharic is their native language, and I didn't understand what was going on. So the headmaster and I are standing right by the door. And watching this teacher teach, and you guys would have had the same response. This is an exciting teacher. It was an engaged class. The teacher was talking to the kids. The kids were responding politely, talking to each other. There was a delightful interchange, and I'm really thinking this is a crackerjack teacher. And the headmaster turns to me and says, "Excuse me, I must leave," and off he goes. Now, the lesson that I was watching was an English language arts lesson. I'm not sure what about it, but I mean, pretty clearly that kind of a lesson. And outside, there's a peal of thunder, boom, 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 boom. And the teacher immediately switches the activity, without any further notice, switches the activity from oral language arts to silent mathematics. And the kids get out bottle caps, and they got some other little things, and the teacher is putting problems up on the board, and the kids are quiet. And I think, what on earth, why did the teacher do this? And then it occurs to me, because after the thunder came the lightning, after the lightning came the rain. And the rain on these galvanized metal roofs in Ethiopia, you could not hear anything. The teacher knew you could not hear anything. And I was so impressed with this teacher. My God, you know, she saw this coming, she knew what to do. And I'm watching there, and all of a sudden the lights go out. And the kids look up at me and smile, I smile back at them, and, you know, then the lights come back on. And here I am thinking, you know, I'm in primitive Africa, sometimes electricity isn't working, and I'm pretty proud of being from Los Angeles, so on. The lights go off again. The kids look up at me, and again, they smile at me, and I smile at them, and the lights come back on. This happens 3 times. And then the teacher comes over to me and says, "Excuse me, but you keep leaning on the mercury light switch." And the expression "frigging fool" somehow passed across my memory bank. Okay, let's see. Oh my, I'm sorry, John, I'm really trying. One more, keep going. Okay, no, we're going backwards, aren't we? Yeah, I think so. Ah, very good. Okay, here's what 290 requires. It says you have to adopt teaching standards. The state board, using a CCSSO consortium, adopted those under 10 headings called standards. There are 174 performances, knowledge, and dispositions. Oregon Department of Education says, quote, districts are required to build their evaluation and support systems using these adopted standards. Okay, so far, got a law, got a state board, got a play, and of the 174, this is your turn and taught task. I'm assuming you now figured out how to do this thing, read that, and turn to someone else. This is a focus on classroom observation. If you have a classroom observation system, how many factors should you focus on? Okay, folks, I'm hoping that when you dealt with that task, you came up with a smaller number. Could you please? Let's see. The idea here is we'll make mistakes, for sure, and you want to make as few as you possibly can. Weighted evidence judgment will lead to mistakes, but far fewer, I think, than some of the techniques we're talking about. In most instances, it's thought, ratings of teachers by administrators provide fairly accurate evidence. But years of more positive reactions than really should have been given dissuade us from using this evidence very heavily. When I went to Indiana U to be a grad student, one of the first projects I was working on dealt with the evaluation of teachers by their principals. My advisor, my professor, had received a grant of around $10,000, wasn't very much, then it seemed like a lot, from the federal government. That was a good thing. And they were to study 880 teachers in the state of Indiana and use principals' ratings of those teachers to actually figure out what how good they were. And he said to me, Jim, when we evaluate teachers by principals, this is the distribution we get. Too many positives, too many wonderful evaluations, very few. He says, what I need you to do is figure out a model that'll make it more normal, because that will help our research. And so he gave me that task, and I remember I'm a beginning grad student, and so I want to do well in this, and I really thought I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I'm watching the Academy Awards. I can probably tell what time of the year it was when I came up with the idea. Watching the Academy Awards, and I see this moment where they bring out the sealed envelope. And I came up with a methodological breakthrough that I thought was terrific. What happened was, we sent out a notice to about 1,000 principals throughout the state and said, you are going to be asked to rate one of the teachers in your school. But before you discover the name of that teacher, we first ask you to mentally put teachers in 10% lumps. In other words, the worst 10%, the next worst 10%, and you do that for the entire group. You do that before you open the envelope. And when you open the envelope, then you'll get this kind of a situation. Remember, I'm trying to avoid this, and using my technique, we got this. Which has, as I said, I've made just about every mistake there is. Now, who does this evaluating? Well, it can be a simple one principal, an assistant principal. You might very well want to think about having the principal be focused on formative evaluation and hiring retired principals to focus on summative evaluation. Someone has to do it, and you just have to do it with what you can afford. And what can you do about this? Well, you can read the book. I think you can learn about teacher evaluation, a program here in Oregon. I've been learning more about it for sure. Please don't be deferent to the work of supposed teacher evaluation experts, and then try to get the program fixed. And you can also read that wonderful book. I would be happy to entertain some questions or comments now. They don't have to be questions. Peter, you want to? Okay. Yeah. Now I have my two charming assistants wearing stage makeup, moving about you. If you have any issues about any of the crud that I was talking about, if you would like to borrow this device, I can give you a very good deal on it. Yes, sir.
I guess it is on. Well, first of all, thanks for your presentation. It was very enlightening.
Is that working?
Hello? Okay. Well, I enjoyed the presentation. And one thing that I just wanted to comment on, you mentioned the one particular myth where you can't observe good teaching. You can't assess good teaching by observation. I kind of disagree with that, because what else?
Wait, you can spot the really good ones.
Okay.
You and I would agree on the great teacher. And you and I would agree on the terrible teacher. It's a middle 50, 60% we would not agree on. That's the ones. And you know, what I suggest in the book, or that Ray and I have talked about here, you might very well want to give more weight if you're at either end of the distribution. In other words, the really great teachers, and give them more evaluative weight. But the middle group, we just can't tell. There's a Dean, you're going to have to move with a little more alacrity, okay?
So last year at this time, California, Southern California, had talked about this incredible evaluation tool that they were using. And what they discovered is that they were giving higher ratings, and it was not improving the teaching that was going on, that kids were still doing subpar on exams and such. Since that time, seeing you're down at UCLA, have they addressed that issue with that evaluation tool that was giving teachers too high of markings, showing them in a distinguished category, when in fact they were partially marginal? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Not truly, but that's never stopped me from responding.
The only reason I brought it up is because you were down in that California area.
Sure, I understand. California is doing some very, very strange things now. Well, I mean, they always do, and I spend most of my adult life down there, but they've moved from their state tests to adopting the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium test that'll be operational next year exclusively. They've done some funny things. See, one of the things, this is why I wish we had more time, but one of the things you really have to understand is when you find people saying that the evaluation system does not seem to pay off in improved kid performance, say, what performance? On what test? And if the test is in fact not accompanied by evidence showing that it can distinguish between good and bad teaching, then don't believe the damn thing, because you can't trust it. And no matter what they were doing, if they were judging its efficacy by using the state test, they were making a mistake. It's you know, I mean, let's talk about teachers' unions. Teachers' unions, I find, are very resistant to the notion of using student growth. Well, if the measure of student growth is a test on which the teacher doesn't have a chance to show how good or bad that teacher is, then hell yes, they should resist it. But what they ought to be doing is working toward tests that can accurately discern the difference between well-taught and badly taught kids. That can be done. It really can. Other comments or questions? Yes.
So, through your research, have you found anything about student perception surveys used to evaluate teachers or student feedback forms?
Well, yes, and a lot of encouraging evidence regarding the use of student evaluations. Based on student evaluations at UCLA, I'd like to point out in January of, I think it was 2002 or something, I was judged one of the top 20 teachers of UCLA for the previous century, the full 100-year century, not this short one, the big mother. Anyhow, so I believe profoundly in student evaluations. The truth is we haven't even started to get as much insight from student appraisal of teachers as we should. The Gates study, Measures of Effective Teaching, showed that student evaluations were indeed related to student scores on insensitive tests. Look, the truth is we haven't trained kids as to what to look for. We haven't gotten them ready to play that game, and I think there's tremendous potential. In the book, I try to talk about that with some enthusiasm. Peter?
Jim, lots of our teachers are not teaching students who are tested by Oaks in Oregon. And so to show student growth, they're going to be required to have other instruments to demonstrate student growth. Right. Are you more hopeful about teachers identifying other means of measuring growth than Oaks?
Well, right now, if I understand the Oregon system, it calls for the teacher to identify 2 goals, a minimum of 2 goals, and to predict how well the students will do, and then to collect pre- and post evidence showing that the kid has done it. It's called the use of student learning objectives, and I spent much of my career dealing with objectives. I know them inside out. That particular model has some serious flaws in it. The main flaw is that you have to predict how well the students are going to do. And there's no reason to do that. Measure the students on something you think important early on, measure them later, see what happened, make a judgment about whether it's good or bad. That's the way to play that game. And so this can be done. The danger, Peter, is we're all human, and we all want to do well. I want to make a good presentation to you, and you want to do a good job with your network and so on. And teachers want to do a good job, and they want to be seen as good, too. And the danger is there are so many ways to corrupt that kind of system. So the trick is to figure out a decent way to use classroom assessment data in a fashion that will be instructionally sensitive and in a way that is credible, believable to a skeptic. You can build in mechanisms to do that. We haven't had much experience with it. I have a lot more confidence in the likelihood of using classroom data, carefully constructed, than using large-scale data. Anything else? And I think we are. There's one yonder behind you, Peter. Shall we make that the last one?
So in your experience working with evaluations across, I'm assuming a vast area, have you encountered models or exemplars where the teachers are really actively involved in the evaluation process? Certainly we're being, we're moving in that direction with SB 290 and the goal setting and, the process that we're developing now in our schools, but some of the best experts are the teachers in the classroom. And I'm just curious if you've seen some models or examples of where teachers are really, truly actively involved in the evaluation process on the ground level, as opposed to just saying, this is good.
It's a good question, and I never recommend something affecting teachers when I don't make a plea to have them be involved, because they bring different kinds of insights. See, what you must understand is that these state departments of education that have been charged with the responsibility to come up with teacher evaluation systems, by and large, they don't have people who know anything about it. They simply do not. And I'm not faulting them. They were not trained to do this, and they've not been responsible for it, and they're trying to do the best job they can. They're inventing things that they think will work. Well, what a wonderful way to corroborate or repudiate their inventions than to have teachers actively involved. And I see some places where they do have teacher review panels. In this report that I mentioned earlier, it talks about the extent to which teachers are involved. And in some states, they really are actively. In many, the state calls the shots. The State Department of Education made the evaluation system. You got to play by those rules or you can't play. So it's a great idea. It should be done. And I think you could forestall many serious mistakes if teachers had a chance to do it. But look, let's not be... I love teachers. I spent my life working with them. But they don't know squat about teacher evaluation either. They don't. And so you got to be very careful when you call on teachers not to assume expertise that is not there. I mean, some simple stuff like, take this. Is a test valid? Is a test valid? We use that expression all the time. The Oregon Department of Education uses the expression valid test, valid. There's no such thing as a valid test. A test yields numbers, scores, from which you make an inference about what those scores mean. That's what's valid or not. Now, if you had teachers who really believed there was a valid test, they would think this test, sanctioned as a valid test, could be used for anything. That would be a serious mistake. So I'm saying, yes, include them for sure, but try to give them the assessment literacy backup so they can make some good decisions. And I think we're through, John. This is the last question, so it should be really good.
No pressure, thanks. Wanted to know, you wrote recently in the English Journal magazine about portfolios and the difficulties with using a portfolio as part of the assessment of teachers. Could you talk just briefly about how one could use portfolios?
Well, look, let's say you and I set up a little study group to try to figure out not only how to use them so that you'd yield an accurate estimate, but how to use them in such a way that people would believe the legitimacy, the credibility. So we would be able to make them impervious to the assault of a skeptic. I mean, I'd want us, our team, to work as hard on that as on the accuracy, because it doesn't do any good if you, we all recognize that for a portfolio, you're looking for probably instances of growth and so on, but you want to look at the same time with equal fervor to make sure that people will believe it once you come to a conclusion. And I think in time, we could. Now, the use of portfolios for evaluation have usually not turned out very well. And the reason for that is, I believe, that there has not been sufficient attention to credibility as there has been to accuracy. You got to do them both. That's what I do.
Thank you, Jim. The next ELN Symposium will be in April. We don't have a date yet, but we now have your email addresses, and you're ours now. So we'll be in touch. Please check out our website, which is on the University of Portland School of Education homepage. We have a lot of resources about teacher evaluation, toolkits from the state, some strategies related to evaluation. We'll have Jim's PowerPoint and a video of the presentation on the website soon. Please fill out the blue survey, because our next ELN meeting in April will primarily be a workshop setting. We really want to give some opportunities on lessons learned, implementing Senate Bill 290 in a broader way, effective teacher evaluation practices, everything from goal setting to teacher observation, who is using growth data, how's it working, how are you doing it, and so we want to know which topics are the ones that are really relevant for you. So fill out the blue the form, and we want to meet your priorities and needs. I appreciate you coming. There will be book signing and opportunity for networking out in the lobby, and hope you come back again and hope you tell your friends. Thank you.